Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own home? Like the one person everyone in your family decided was the designated failure? I lived that life for 10 years, right up until the day my own mother didn't just kick me out. She erased me. The steering wheel was cold under my hands, a deep, biting chill that seeped through my thin gloves. My car, a 10-year-old sedan with a cough in its engine, was the only thing I owned that my family hadn't commented on. Probably because they'd forgotten it existed, just like they'd forgotten I existed, except for when they needed someone to blame. The dread in my stomach was a familiar companion, a cold, heavy stone that sat there every time I made this drive. Christmas Day, the annual Vance family dinner. For me, it was the annual trial. I had spent the last $74 in my bank account on gifts. A cashmere scarf for my mother, Sharon, because she loved soft things. A leather-bound journal for my father, Robert, for his fleeting thoughts, and a ridiculously expensive, minimalist silver bracelet for my older sister, Brianna, because she only valued things that cost a lot. It was a pathetic attempt to buy peace, a down payment on a single day without being called a loser. I knew it wouldn't work, but hope is a stubborn, foolish thing. I pulled onto Maple Creek Lane, a street lined with perfectly manicured lawns and houses that looked like they were built from gingerbread and smugness. Our house was at the end of the cul-de-sac, the biggest one, of course. My father's pride and joy. The Christmas lights were dazzling, a professional display Brianna had no doubt arranged. Everything in their lives was a performance. I parked, took a deep breath, and gathered the perfectly wrapped gifts. The snow was coming down in thick, wet flakes, melting into my hair as I walked up the stone pathway. My old house key, worn smooth over the years, felt like a talisman in my hand. Please, just for today, let it be okay. I slid the key into the lock. It didn't turn. I frowned, jiggling it. Maybe it was frozen. I tried again, pushing harder. Nothing. Just the solid, unmoving thud of metal against metal. A knot of ice formed in my chest, colder than the air around me. I leaned forward, peering through the small decorative glass pane in the door, and there they were, my family. They were all seated at the grand dining table, the one my mother polished with lemon oil every Saturday. The table was set for a feast. A golden brown turkey sat in the center. My mother, Sharon, was lifting a glass of wine, her painted red lips curved into a smile. My father, Robert, sat beside her, his shoulders slumped in their usual passive way. And Brianna, my golden child sister, was laughing, her perfect teeth flashing in the light of the crystal chandelier. They weren't eating, they were waiting, they were watching me. Our eyes met through the glass. Brianna's smile widened into a smirk. My mother's face hardened, her expression shifting from holiday cheer to cold dismissal. She placed her wine glass down with a delicate click, stood up, and walked toward the door. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She wasn't going to open it. I knew she wasn't. She stopped just on the other side of the thick oak door, her face a pale oval in the glass. Her voice, muffled but clear, cut through the wood like a shard of ice. "We can't have a failure living under our roof anymore, Cassidy," she said. Her tone was flat, conversational, as if she were telling me they were out of milk. "It's embarrassing. Brianna has her career, her reputation. We have ours. You are a loose end. We've decided to tie it up." Behind her, Brianna's smirk became a triumphant grin. She leaned over to my father and whispered something. He just stared down at his plate, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his own glass. He wouldn't look at me. He never did. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. "Mom, it's Christmas. My things are inside." "We're inside?" She corrected me, her voice devoid of any emotion. "We packed them for you." She gestured with her head toward the side of the porch. I turned, and there they were, 3 large black trash bags, sagging and lumpy, dusted with a layer of fresh snow. My life, my clothes, my books, the few pictures I had of Grandma Alara, all of it, stuffed into plastic, like garbage. I had been officially kicked out, banned, excluded from the one place that was supposed to be my home. I looked back at my mother. Tears were blurring her face into a cruel watercolor. Why? It was the only word I could manage. A flicker of something annoyance, maybe, crossed her features. Because we're tired of it, Cassidy. Tired of your sad little life. Dropping out of law school. Wasting years on that old woman. You're a nobody. A ghost in this family. And we've decided to perform an exorcism. The sound of laughter echoed from the dining room. Brianna, of course. It was a sharp, ugly sound. I was mocked, standing on the stoop of my own home in the falling snow, holding gifts I couldn't afford for people who despised me. My father finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second. There was no defiance in them, only shame. And he wasn't ashamed of my mother, or of Brianna. He was ashamed of me. My mother gave a final dismissive wave of her hand and turned her back on me, walking back to the warm, bright dining room. Back to her perfect daughter, and her silent husband. The heavy oak door was a final, unbreachable wall. I was left alone in the cold, the laughter from inside a poison in the air, the trash bags full of my life sitting next to me like a tombstone. The night I was kicked out of my own home, I spent sleeping in the back seat of my car. I drove to a desolate 24-hour supermarket parking lot, nestled between a fleet of semi-trucks whose rumbling engines provided a bizarre, mechanical lullaby. The cashmere scarf I'd bought for my mother was bunched up under my head as a pathetic pillow, its softness a cruel reminder of my wasted hope. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces in the dining room window. My mother's cold disdain, my father's weak avoidance, my sister's triumphant smirk. The image was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. My phone buzzed around 2 a.m. For a wild, stupid second, my heart leaped. Maybe it was my dad, finally having grown a spine. Maybe it was my mom, overcome with a sudden miraculous wave of maternal guilt. Of course, it wasn't. The screen glowed with a message from Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. It read, "I'm so sorry, honey. Your mom is just... You know how she is." I stared at the words, a fresh wave of bitterness washing over me. You know how she is. That was the family motto, the excuse that enabled a lifetime of cruelty. Aunt Carol was the professional enabler, the one who saw the abuse but was too terrified of my mother's wrath to ever say a word. Her sympathy was as useless as a screen door on a submarine. It was a weapon of silence. I typed back a single cold word, "I know." Then I turned my phone off, plunging the car into absolute darkness and silence, save for the hum of the nearby trucks. It felt more honest that way. The next few weeks were a freefall into desperation, a tangible struggle that ground me down to my very core. The $74 I had wasted on their gifts was a ghost that haunted my empty wallet. My first stop was a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind where the bedspread felt sticky and the air smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. I paid for 2 nights. On the third day, I couldn't afford another. I was officially homeless. I showered at a truck stop, paying $5 for 10 minutes of lukewarm water. I ate protein bars I bought with loose change I found under the car seats. I spent my days in the public library, pretending to read while really just soaking up the free heat. The shame was a physical weight on my shoulders. Every time someone looked at me, I felt like they could see the failure clinging to me like a bad smell. I was invisible and yet horribly exposed at the same time. One afternoon, staring at the dregs of my coffee in a cheap diner, I knew I had hit a new low. My gas tank was on empty, and I had exactly $4.16 to name. My stomach ached with a hunger that was more than just a need for food. It was a hunger for dignity. My eyes fell to my wrist. I was wearing a small, silver locket. It had been my Grandma Alara's. It was simple, unadorned, and the only piece of jewelry I had left. Inside was a tiny, faded picture of her and me when I was a little girl. Her arm was around me, her smile wide and genuine, not the tight, forced smile my mother always wore for photos. Selling it felt like selling a piece of my soul. But my soul couldn't fill my gas tank. I found a pawn shop, with a flickering neon sign. The man behind the counter barely glanced at me. He weighed the locket in his hand, his face impassive. $20? He grunted. It's vintage silver, I said, my voice thin. And it has sentimental value. He looked at me then, his eyes cold. Sentiment don't pay my bills, lady. $20. Take it or leave it. I took it. I walked out of that shop feeling hollowed out, the $20 bill in my hand feeling like the dirtiest money I had ever touched. I had sold my last connection to the one person who ever loved me for a half a tank of gas and a hot meal. Rock bottom, I thought, didn't just have a basement, it had a sub-basement, and I was digging my way down. I had established a P.O. box months ago, a small act of independence my family had mocked. Who's going to write to you, Cassie? Brianna had laughed. It was where I sent my junk mail and the occasional bill. I checked it out of habit, expecting it to be empty. But this time, wedged in the back, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy, important. The return address was a law firm downtown. Evergreen Legal Services. I tore it open with trembling fingers. The letterhead was crisp, the type formal. It was an official notification, a summons of sorts. It was a request for my presence at the official will reading of the late Elara Vance. My grandmother. I stared at the paper, my mind reeling. A will reading. My family had always spoken of Grandma Elara with a sort of pitying disdain. She was the poor side of the family, the one who lived in a tiny, run-down house and wore mended clothes. When she passed away 2 years ago, my mother had handled the meager arrangements with a sigh, complaining about the cost. She left nothing but debts, of course, Mom had said. Just like you, Cassie. A legacy of failure. They had convinced me she was as poor as I was, that she had nothing to give. I almost threw the letter away, dismissing it as some kind of mistake, another cruel joke in a long line of them. But something stopped me. A flicker of my grandmother's defiance sparked inside me. She was the one who taught me how to spot a sturdy oak from a weak pine, how to read the clouds, how to be quiet and watch. She was the only person whose love for me felt unconditional. This letter was my only link to her, my last chance to hear her voice in some way. It was a seed of hope, planted in the barren, frozen ground of my life. I folded the letter, tucked it into my pocket, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt a purpose. The offices of Evergreen Legal Services were on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world away from the grimy motels and truck stops I now called home. The air smelled of expensive leather and old paper. I felt painfully out of place in my worn jeans and faded sweater. I had spent my last few dollars on a bus ticket and a coffee, just so I wouldn't walk in shivering and empty-handed. The receptionist looked me up and down, her perfectly arched eyebrow conveying a universe of judgment. She probably thought I was there to serve a subpoena. "I'm Cassidy Vance," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have an appointment with Mr. Abernathy regarding the will of Elara Vance." Her expression shifted to one of professional politeness. "Of course, Miss Vance. Right this way." I was led into a large, wood-paneled office with a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the entire city. An older man with kind eyes and a fringe of white hair stood to greet me. This was Mr. Abernathy. "Miss Vance, thank you for coming," he said, shaking my hand. "Please, have a seat." I looked around the empty room. There were several other plush chairs, all unoccupied. "Am I the first one here?" I asked. My parents, my sister." Mr. Abernathy gave a small, sad smile. "I sent notifications to your mother and sister as well. They declined to attend. Your mother informed me, and I quote, that they were not interested in wasting an afternoon sorting through a pile of sentimental junk and debt. The words were a familiar sting, but this time, they were followed by a strange sense of relief. I was alone. For once, that felt like an advantage. Well, I said, sitting down, I'm here. Mr. Abernathy opened a thick folder on his desk. Your grandmother was a very wise woman, Cassidy, and a very private one. She knew your family's disposition. She structured your final wishes accordingly. He slid a document across the desk to me. It was her last will and testament. Your family was correct in one sense. Your grandmother did not have much in the way of liquid assets. She lived very frugally. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. However, she was an exceptionally shrewd investor in one particular area. He then slid a second document over. It was a cashier's check. My eyes widened. The number written on it made the air leave my lungs in a sudden whoosh. $50,000. To me, it was a fortune. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. She saved for years, Mr. Abernathy explained gently, and she made a few very smart, very small investments that paid off handsomely right before she passed. She earmarked this specifically for you. But that wasn't all. He pushed a third item across the desk, a folded, yellowed property deed. This, he said, his voice soft, is her real legacy. The deed to her house and the land it sits on, free and clear. It's in an old, neglected part of the city. I know, but your grandmother always said, they see blight. I see potential. The property is yours, Cassidy. Unconditionally. Tears welled in my eyes. I was speechless. A house. A home. My own home. There's one more thing, Mr. Abernathy said. He handed me a simple sealed envelope with my name written on it, in my grandmother's familiar spidery handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. The letter was short, but every word was a balm on my wounded soul. My dearest Cassie, it began. If you are reading this, it means the others didn't bother to show up. Good. This is for you alone. They will tell you that you were a failure for dropping out of law school to take care of me in my final years. They are wrong. That act of love, of sacrifice, was not your failure. It was your greatest strength. It proved you have a heart that sees value beyond money and status. I am leaving you what little I have. Don't use it for revenge, my girl. Revenge is a poison you drink yourself. Use it to build something that is yours. Build a life so solid they can never shake it again. The world is full of people who see rust. Be the one who sees the fire underneath. All my love, Grandma Alara. I was openly crying now, silent tears streaming down my face. At that moment, a quiet knock came at the door, and another man entered. He was tall, in his late 60s, with a weathered face, hands like gnarled oak, and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a simple flannel shirt and work boots, looking as out of place in this fancy office as I felt. Cassidy Vance, Mr. Abernathy said, I'd like you to meet an old and dear friend of your grandmother's. This is Alistair Finch. Alistair looked at me, his expression gruff but not unkind. He glanced at the letter in my hand, then at my tear-streaked face. He nodded slowly. Alara talked about you all the time, he said, his voice a low rumble. Said you had her eyes. Not the color, the way you look at things. She said you could see the bones of a house. He walked over and looked out the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Your grandmother, he said, turning back to me, saw value where others saw rust. Let's see if you do too. The first thing I did with my inheritance was not to buy a new car or fancy clothes. The first thing I did was disappear. I rented a small, anonymous apartment on the other side of the city, a place my family would never think to look. I bought a new phone and gave the number to no one but Miss Abernathy and Alistair Finch. For all my family knew, Cassidy Vance, the family failure, had fallen off the face of the earth, and in a way she had. The girl who cried on her mother's doorstep was gone. In her place, someone new was being forged. My secret transformation began, not in a boardroom, but in the dusty, quiet aisles of the city library's reference section. Guided by Alistair, I began a self-imposed, intensive course on everything my law school education had skipped. I didn't just read books, I devoured them. I spent months learning about urban renewal, municipal zoning codes, architectural history, and property investment strategies. Alistair would drop off stacks of trade journals and blueprints, testing me with gruff questions. What's the load-bearing wall here? What's the setback requirement for a corner lot in this district? What's the difference between cast iron and PVC piping? He wasn't a gentle teacher. He was a master craftsman, and he demanded precision. With $10,000 of the inheritance, I founded a small, legally registered company. I named it Vance Heritage Restorations. The name felt right. I was restoring more than just houses. I was restoring a legacy my family had tried to bury. My first official project was my grandmother's house. It was a small, sad-looking bungalow on a street where every other house seemed to be sighing with neglect. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and weeds choked the yard. But my grandmother was right. I didn't see rust. I saw the fire underneath. I saw the solid oak floors hiding under grimy linoleum, the beautiful brick fireplace boarded up behind cheap drywall, the elegant lines of the roof hidden by layers of asphalt shingles. I poured my grief, my anger, and my newfound knowledge into that little house. I didn't just hire a crew, I became the crew. Alistair connected me with a few honest, semi-retired contractors, a plumber named Sal, and an electrician named Maria, who were willing to teach me as we worked. I learned how to sweat copper pipes, how to run new wiring through old walls, how to lay tile and hang drywall. My hands, once soft from library books, became calloused and strong. I'd come home to my small apartment every night, exhausted, covered in dust and paint, and fall asleep with a textbook on my chest. I was building more than a house. I was building myself. Alistair would show up unannounced, walking through the construction site with a critical eye. He'd rap his knuckles on a newly installed cabinet. "This is a quarter-inch off level, Cassie. Do it again." He'd point to a line of grout. "Sloppy. A homeowner will see that every single day. Do it again." It was tough love mentorship at its most brutal, but I knew he was teaching me a lesson that went beyond construction. Excellence is not an accident. It is a choice you make over and over again. After 6 months of back-breaking work, the transformation was complete. The sad little bungalow was now a jewel box of a home, its original character shining through with modern updates. We had saved the original wood floors, exposed the brick fireplace, and installed a brand new kitchen and bathroom. I put it on the market. It sold in 3 days for more than double what I had invested. The profit felt like a jolt of electricity, but I didn't celebrate. I didn't buy a single luxury. I took every single penny of that profit, combined it with the rest of my inheritance, and on Alistair's advice, I did something bold. I bought 2 more dilapidated properties on that same neglected street. They were even worse than my grandmother's had been, and I couldn't wait to get started. My family had no idea. In their minds, I was probably living on the streets, a pathetic loser who had finally, mercifully disappeared from their perfect lives. The thought of their ignorance was a quiet, satisfying hum beneath the surface of my hard work. I was a ghost to them, but I wasn't haunting their past. I was building a future they couldn't even begin to imagine. I was no longer a nobody. I was nobody, Inc., and I was just getting started. Months bled into a year. My life fell into a grueling but satisfying rhythm: buy, restore, sell, reinvest. Vance Heritage Restorations was no longer just me and a couple of part-time contractors. I had a small, dedicated crew. We were getting a reputation in the city's real estate circles as the scrappy little company that could turn forgotten wrecks into sought-after homes. I was still living frugally, still driving my old car, still pouring every dime back into the business. The work was my life. One afternoon, I was trying to finalize the paperwork for a new property and hit a snag. The bank needed a certified copy of my birth certificate to process the business loan. A simple, bureaucratic hurdle that created a knot of dread in my stomach. The original was in a box of old documents at my parents' house. The house on Maple Creek Lane. The house I was still banned from. There was only one person I could call. My fingers felt heavy as I dialed the number. Aunt Carol answered on the second ring, her voice a nervous flutter. "Cassie? Is that you? Oh my goodness, are you okay? We haven't heard from you in forever." "I'm fine, Aunt Carol," I said, keeping my voice flat and businesslike. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want her apologies. I just wanted the document. "I need a favor. I need my birth certificate. It should be in a file box in the study closet." "Oh, oh, of course, honey. I think I can do that. Your mom's at her book club this afternoon." The relief in her voice was palpable. She was still terrified of my mother. "Are you sure you're all right? Brianna was saying she thought you might have, well, you know." "I'm fine," I repeated, cutting her off. "Can you get it for me? I can pick it up from your place tomorrow." "Yes, yes, of course," she stammered. Then, in that way she had of filling silence with nervous chatter, she dropped the bomb. "It's all been so hectic here. Anyway, you'll never guess. Brianna is engaged. To a wonderful man. A project manager at some big development firm. His name is Declan Hayes, very handsome, very successful. Your mother is over the moon. They're having a lavish engagement party tonight at the Gilded Lantern." The Gilded Lantern. One of the most expensive, exclusive restaurants in the city. Of course, for Brianna, only the best would do. A sharp, ugly pang of something, not jealousy, but a kind of morbid curiosity, hit me. I wanted to see him. This man who was stepping into my family's gilded cage, this neutral party who had only ever heard their side of the story. That night, I did something reckless. I drove to the Gilded Lantern. I didn't go inside, of course. I parked across the street, my old car looking like a stray dog in a pack of pedigreed wolves. I just watched. Through the huge picture windows, I could see them. My family, holding court at the best table. My mother, radiant and proud. My father, smiling his empty, pleasing smile. And Brianna, sparkling in a designer dress, holding the hand of a tall, sharp-looking man with dark hair and a confident posture. That had to be him.
Declan Hayes.
He looked exactly as I'd imagined. Smart, ambitious, polished. He fit right in. He laughed at something my father said, and my mother watched him with an adoring gaze. He was the new golden child. I sat there for almost an hour, a ghost watching a life that was no longer mine. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. It just felt distant, like watching a movie I'd seen before. Then, the restaurant door opened. Declan stepped out onto the sidewalk, pulling out his phone, presumably to take a call in a quieter space. He paced back and forth, his back to me at first. When he turned, his gaze swept across the street, over my car. Our eyes met for a brief second through my windshield. He didn't know me. To him, I was just a woman sitting in a beat-up car in the dark. He gave a polite, almost imperceptible nod, the kind of dismissive gesture you give to a valet or a doorman. A non-person. Then he turned away, his attention back on his phone call, having already forgotten my existence. A hot flush of shame and anger washed over me. He saw exactly what my family wanted him to see. A nobody. A failure. A woman sitting alone in a cheap car across the street from their glittering celebration. It stung. It was a fresh wound on top of old scars, but as I put the car in drive and pulled away, the sting sharpened into something else. It sharpened into resolve. He was the perfect outside witness. Right now, he believed their story. But one day, I thought, one day, he would see the truth, and I would be the one to show him. The encounter with Declan Hayes lit a new kind of fire under me. It was no longer just about building a life for myself. It was about building a reputation so solid, so undeniable, that the caricature my family had painted of me would crumble to dust on its own. Vance Heritage Restorations went into overdrive. I started taking on bigger risks. My niche, the one my competitors ignored, was my secret weapon. Big corporate firms like the one Brianna worked for, and now Declan, saw old, historic neighborhoods as teardowns. They saw blocks of small, single-family homes as obstacles to their sprawling, high-density luxury condo projects. I saw communities. I saw character. I saw value. My company began buying not just one or two houses on a street, but entire blocks. I'd meet with the homeowners, many of them elderly residents, who were being pressured to sell to developers for a fraction of what their homes were worth. I offered them a different deal. I would buy their property at a fair market price, but with a promise: I wouldn't tear it down. I would restore it. I would preserve the soul of their neighborhood. Word got around. I wasn't just a house flipper anymore. I was a preservationist. My reputation for quality work and community respect grew. I was still living frugally, pouring every dollar of profit back into acquiring more properties. But my company was growing exponentially. I now had 3 full-time crews, a project manager, and a small office in one of the buildings I had restored. 6 months after Brianna's engagement party, I found myself in a place I never expected to be: the main auditorium of City Hall. The City Planning Commission was holding a public meeting to review bids for the Elmwood Park Revitalization Project, a small but prestigious contract to restore a historic public pavilion and its surrounding gardens. It was a high-profile project, and I knew the big firms would be bidding. I was there as the founder and CEO of Vance Heritage. I wore my one good suit, a simple navy blue one I'd bought at a consignment shop. I felt a nervous energy buzzing in the room. Then I saw him, Declan Hayes. He was sitting 2 rows ahead of me, part of a sleek, corporate-looking team from a major firm, Northgate Development, Brianna's firm. He was there representing them. He looked just as polished as he had at the restaurant, his suit sharp, his posture confident. He was laughing with a colleague, completely unaware of my presence. When the agenda item was called, Northgate presented first. Declan stood and delivered a slick, professional pitch full of corporate jargon about maximizing public use footprints and synergistic community engagement. It was all gloss and no substance. They planned to tear down the original century-old pavilion and replace it with a modern glass and steel structure. Then, it was my turn. Next, a proposal from Vance Heritage Restorations, the commission chair announced. I walked to the podium, my heart pounding. I saw Declan glance back, a flicker of polite disinterest in his eyes. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? The woman in the beat-up car was a world away from the woman in the suit, standing at the city podium. I began to speak. I didn't use corporate jargon. I talked about the original builders of the pavilion, the master craftsmen, who used local timber and stone. I talked about the generations of families who had held picnics and weddings there. I unrolled my blueprints, which focused on meticulous restoration, not replacement. My proposal was passionate, it was detailed, and it was personal. I wasn't just trying to win a contract, I was fighting to save a piece of the city's soul. As I spoke, I saw a change in Declan's posture. He stopped whispering to his colleague. He sat up straighter. I could feel his eyes on me, and his expression was no longer disinterested. It was confused. A deep furrow appeared between his brows. It was the look of a man trying to solve a puzzle, a flicker of recognition, of a memory trying to surface. He knew he'd seen my face before, but he couldn't place it in this context. The woman he'd dismissed as a nobody was now his direct competitor. 2 weeks later, the city announced its decision. I had won the bid. I saw Declan again a few days after that, at a coffee shop near City Hall where contractors and city officials often met. He was alone, reading a report. I walked right up to his table. "Mr. Hayes," I said. He looked up, startled. The confusion was back, stronger this time. "I'm sorry. Have we Cassidy Vance," I said, extending my hand. "Vance Heritage. We were both bidding on the Elmwood Park project." He shook my hand, his grip firm but his eyes searching my face. "Vance," he repeated slowly. "Of course. Congratulations on the win. Your proposal was impressive." "Thank you," I said. "Brianna never mentioned me?" The name dropped between us like a stone. His eyes widened slightly. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. I could see the exact moment he made the connection. Vance, Brianna's sister. The family failure. The woman in the old car. The woman who just beat his major corporate firm for a city contract. A complex series of emotions played across his face: shock, disbelief, and then a new, calculating curiosity. The poor Cassie narrative he had been fed was suddenly full of holes. He was looking at me now, really looking at me. As if for the first time, the seed of doubt had been planted, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was going to grow. The major twist, the one that would change everything, didn't start with a bang. It started with a memo from the city planning department. It was an announcement that rippled through the wealthiest enclaves of the city like a shockwave. The city, in a bold move to increase tax revenue, was launching a massive rezoning initiative for a single prestigious residential street. The initiative would allow a single approved developer to acquire all the properties on the street for a high-density luxury project. The name of the street was Maple Creek Lane. My family's street. Panic erupted. The residents of Maple Creek, who had spent their lives cultivating an aura of untouchable suburban perfection, were suddenly faced with the prospect of their million-dollar homes being bought out from under them and demolished. And at the forefront of the outrage, rising like two self-appointed generals, were my mother and my sister. It was the perfect stage for them. My mother, Sharon, a woman who thrived on being the center of attention, became a passionate community organizer overnight. She held emergency meetings in her living room, her voice trembling with manufactured indignation as she spoke of protecting our heritage. My sister Brianna used her credentials as a top real estate agent at Northgate Development to position herself as the expert voice of the resistance. They were magnificent in their hypocrisy. They were on the local news, standing in front of my father's perfectly landscaped colonial, decrying the soulless, greedy corporations that would dare to threaten their idyllic way of life. "These developers don't see homes," Brianna said to a reporter, her face a mask of earnest concern. "They see assets to be liquidated. They don't care about families. They only care about the bottom line." I watched the news report on my small office television, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. It was the same speech Declan had given at the city planning meeting, the same empty rhetoric. She was fighting against a caricature of the very industry she and her fiancé worked for. To rally the entire neighborhood and garner maximum media attention, my mother and Brianna organized a massive Save Maple Creek community meeting and family reunion. It was to be held in the neighborhood park, a sprawling green space right at the entrance to the lane. They ordered banners, printed flyers, and called every news station in the city. They were creating their own battlefield, confident they would be the celebrated victors. They were fighting a ghost, a faceless corporate entity they could rail against. They had no idea the ghost had a name, and that name was Vance. The gears were turning in my head. This was more than an opportunity. It was a convergence of all the roads I had been traveling. My niche expertise in preserving historic neighborhoods, the capital I had painstakingly built, the reputation I had earned, it all led to this. I could be that single approved developer. I could buy Maple Creek Lane. The thought was so audacious, so terrifying, and so perfect that it took my breath away. It was the ultimate checkmate, a move so unexpected they would never see it coming. They had built the stage, they had invited the audience, and they had written the script. but I was about to write the ending. The day after the Save Maple Creek meeting was announced, my phone rang. It was Alistair. My office. 30 minutes was all he said before hanging up. When I walked in, he was standing over a massive table, and spread across it were the official city plans for the Maple Creek Lane rezoning initiative. Blueprints, zoning variance applications, financial projections. He had gotten a copy of the entire bid package. He didn't look up. He just tapped a thick document with his finger. The bidding process is anonymous until the final selection is made, he said, his voice a low rumble. But I have my sources. I know who the major players are. Northgate is putting together a massive bid, so are two other national firms. They all plan to level the place. He finally looked at me, his eyes sharp and intense. Your family is fighting a ghost, Cassie. They're making all this noise thinking they can scare off some faceless corporation in New York or Chicago. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. They have no idea the real threat could come from 2 miles down the road. He pointed to my company's latest financial statements, which he had also laid out on the table. You have the capital. You have the city's goodwill from the Elmwood Park project. And you have a unique angle they don't. Preservation. You could put in a bid that honors the city's tax revenue goals, while promising to restore, not demolish. You could win this. I stared at the plans, my heart hammering. The scale of it was immense. This wasn't just restoring a few houses. It was acquiring an entire street of multi-million-dollar properties. It was a massive financial risk that could bankrupt my company if it went wrong. For a brief moment, I hesitated. The old Cassie, the one who was afraid of her own shadow, whispered in my ear. Is this too much? Is this going too far? Alistair must have seen the flicker of doubt in my eyes. He walked over and put a heavy calloused hand on my shoulder. It felt grounding, solid. Listen to me, he said, his voice softer now. I knew your grandmother for 30 years. She believed in building things. She took what was broken and made it whole. Your family, they tear things down. They tear down people. They tried to tear you down. He looked me straight in the eye. What do you want your legacy to be, Cassie? Do you want to build, or do you want to hide? His words cut through my fear, crystallizing my purpose. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about proving my grandmother right. It was about building a life so strong that their poison could never touch me again. That night, I didn't sleep. I worked with my small team, including my new assistant, a sharp young woman named Maya, to finalize the most ambitious proposal of my life. We worked through financial models, architectural renderings, and a detailed preservation plan for every single house on Maple Creek Lane. At around 4 a.m., it was done. Maya looked over the final bid package, her eyes wide as she scanned the scope of the project, the numbers that made my head spin. She looked up at me, not with the friendly familiarity of a Kaluk, but with a new kind of respect, a deference I hadn't seen from her before. It's ready, ma'am, she said quietly. The word hung in the air. Ma'am. It wasn't Cassie. It was a title, a recognition of authority. In that quiet pre-dawn moment, I felt the last vestiges of the failure they had created fall away. The power shift wasn't just in my bank account or my business portfolio. It was inside me. It felt real. It felt permanent. The day of the community meeting was bright and cold. The park at the entrance to Maple Creek Lane was a sea of people. Residents in expensive parkas stood shoulder to shoulder with local politicians sniffing for a photo opportunity, and news crews with their large cameras poised for action. Banners that read "Save Our Homes" and "Corporate Greed Stops Here" fluttered in the crisp autumn wind. And on a makeshift stage, basking in the glow of adoration, were my parents and my sister. My mother, looking regal and commanding. My father, standing beside her with a look of pained importance, and Brianna, the hero of the hour, holding a microphone, her voice ringing with passion as she rallied her neighbors. I arrived late and on purpose. I stood at the very back of the crowd. a solitary figure in my simple but perfectly tailored navy blue pantsuit. I didn't need to be at the front. The back was the perfect vantage point. It didn't take long for Brianna to spot me. Her eyes, sweeping the crowd for adoring faces, snagged on mine. For a moment, she faltered, her practiced speech stumbling. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Then it was replaced by a look of cruel opportunity. This was too good for her to pass up. A chance to cement her status as the neighborhood's savior and publicly shame the family failure, all in one go. She smiled, a wide, predatory smile, and raised her hand, pointing directly at me. "Oh, look, everyone," she called out, her voice amplified by the speakers, booming across the park. "It seems my little sister, Cassidy, decided to show up. I'm so glad you could make it, Cassie." A murmur went through the crowd as hundreds of heads turned to look at me. I stood perfectly still, my expression neutral. Brianna's voice dripped with condescending pity. "She's probably had a hard time lately. Probably heard there were free donuts and coffee. Don't worry, honey, we'll save some for you." A wave of snickers and outright laughter rolled through the crowd. They were laughing with her. They were laughing at me. I saw my mother and father on the stage. My mother's lips were pressed into a thin, satisfied line. My father looked at me with that familiar expression of pitying disgust. This was the ultimate humiliation, delivered on a public stage for everyone to see. I was the useless outcast, the punchline to their triumphant story. I glanced at the stage and my eyes met Declan's. He was standing just behind Brianna, and he was not laughing. He looked deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. He was witnessing their cruelty unfiltered, and he was seeing me not as a caricature, but as a person being publicly torn down by her own family. His discomfort was a small, silent validation in a sea of mockery. It was the final piece falling into place. The show was about to begin. A city councilwoman, a polished woman named Margaret Croft, stepped up to the podium after Brianna's speech, quieting the crowd. The real reason for the gathering was about to be addressed. "Thank you, Brianna, for that passionate defense of your community," she began, her voice crisp and official. "As you all know, the city has been reviewing proposals for the Maple Creek Lane development zone. I am here today to give you an update." A hush fell over the park. My family on stage looked smug, confident. They believed their public relations campaign had worked, that they had scared off the corporate vultures. "The bidding process closed yesterday," Councilwoman Croft continued, "and a final decision has been made by the commission." She paused for dramatic effect, looking out over the anxious faces. "I want to assure all the residents of Maple Creek that the winning bid was chosen not just for its significant monetary value, but for its deep, demonstrated commitment to preserving the architectural and community character of this historic neighborhood." A wave of relieved applause broke out. My mother beamed, squeezing my father's arm. Brianna shot a triumphant look out at the crowd, as if to say, "I did this." They thought they had won. The councilwoman held up a hand to quiet the applause. "The winning proposal is, in fact, a preservation plan. There will be no demolitions. Every home will be meticulously restored and protected under historical landmark status." The cheering grew louder. This was everything they had been fighting for. "We are absolutely thrilled," Councilwoman Croft said, her voice rising with enthusiasm, "to announce that the new owner of the entire Maple Creek development zone, and the steward of its future, is a celebrated local firm." She paused, looking down at her notes. The name she was about to read was a bombshell, and she knew it. A firm with a proven track record of excellence in historic restoration, Vance Heritage Restorations. A confused, uncertain murmur rippled through the crowd. "Vance?" I saw people turning to my mother and Brianna, assuming it was some arm of their real estate company. Brianna's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter confusion. She mouthed the name to my mother, who just shook her head, bewildered. They had never heard of it. Then, Councilwoman Croft delivered the final devastating blow. She smiled brightly, scanning the crowd, and I believe the company's founder is with us today. I would like to invite the CEO and founder of Vance Heritage Restorations to come up and say a few words. Miss Cassidy Vance? Silence. A deep, profound, absolute silence that sucked all the air out of the park. Every single head, which had turned to me in mockery just minutes before, now swiveled back in stunned disbelief. The news camera, which had been focused on the stage, swung around and its bright, unforgiving light landed directly on me. In that single silent moment, the world shifted on its axis. My family froze. Their smiles were gone, replaced by masks of pure, unadulterated shock. My mother's face went slack, the color draining from it, until her skin was the color of chalk. My father's hand, which had been raised to wave to a neighbor, stopped midair. And Brianna, her jaw literally dropped. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide with a horror that was almost comical. The family failure, the useless nobody, the loser, who came for free donuts, was the new owner of her entire world. The shock was so complete, so total, that for a long, beautiful moment, nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. The stunned silence was a perfect, beautiful vacuum. And into that vacuum, a voice cut through the air like a thunderclap. "Congratulations, boss." It was Alistair Finch. He had been standing quietly in the crowd a few feet away from me. A silent guardian I hadn't even noticed. He now stepped forward, a wide, proud grin splitting his weathered face. He clapped me firmly on the shoulder, his voice loud enough for everyone around us, and the news microphones to hear. "Kim knew you had it in you the whole time." His simple, powerful words were the confirmation that shattered the illusion. It was real. This wasn't a mistake. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of gasps and frantic whispers. The dominoes began to fall, fast and hard. The news camera, which had been on me, now swung to the stage, zooming in on the antagonists of this little drama. It captured the exact moment Declan Hayes, the neutral observer, passed his judgment. He looked from Brianna's horrified, contorted face to me, standing calm and composed in the crowd. His expression was a perfect storm of dawning realization, shock, and then a profound, unmistakable disgust. He didn't say a word, he didn't have to. He took one deliberate, measured step away from Brianna on the stage, a physical act of separation that was more damning than any insult. He was distancing himself from her, from them, in front of the entire world. Then my eyes found the person whose reaction I was most curious to see. Aunt Carol, the enabler. She was in the front row, having come to cheer on her sister and niece. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Her face, which was already pale, turned an impossible ashen white. Her hand flew to her mouth, and her eyes, wide with terror, darted from my mother's frozen form to me. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. She was completely, utterly speechless. The woman whose weak apologies had been the soundtrack to my suffering was now rendered mute by my success. Her silent panic was the most eloquent apology I had ever received. The crowd's reaction was a tidal wave. Their whispers turned from confusion to awe, then to excitement. They weren't laughing at me anymore. They were pointing at my family, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning contempt. The heroes of Save Maple Creek were suddenly the villains of a much more interesting story. In the space of 30 seconds, my family had become utterly, publicly isolated on their own stage of shame. The humiliation they had so gleefully dished out had been returned to them, 1,000 times over. Councilwoman Croft, recovering from her own surprise, gestured for me to come forward. "Miss Vance, the stage is yours." I walked through the parting crowd, my footsteps feeling steady and sure on the damp grass. Every eye was on me. I didn't feel nervous, I felt calm. I walked up the short flight of stairs to the stage and took the microphone from the councilwoman's hand. I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't look at the cameras. I looked directly at the three people who had tried to break me. My mother, my father, and my sister. Their faces were a portrait, of shattered reality. White, trembling, their eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and raw terror. This was the moment, the culmination of years of quiet pain and silent work. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. I let the silence stretch for a moment, and then I spoke, my voice calm, clear, and carrying an unshakable power that filled the entire park. "Mom," I said, my gaze locked on hers. "You changed the locks on one house because you were embarrassed by me. I let that hang in the air for a beat. I bought the company that just bought your entire street to teach you the value of a property deed." A collective gasp went through the crowd. My mother flinched as if I had physically struck her. Brianna made a small, choked sound. I then turned my attention to the residents of Maple Creek, holding up a hand to reassure them. "And to everyone who lives here," I said, my voice warming slightly, "please, don't worry. Vance Heritage Restorations has a simple mission. My company preserves value. It doesn't destroy it. Your homes are safe." I turned my eyes back to my family for my final words. I looked at Brianna, then my father, and finally back to my mother. Unlike some people, it was over. My family shattered. Brianna, the golden child, the picture of perfection, crumpled. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob, her shoulders shaking. My father looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes, his face gray and empty, and my mother, her eyes rolled back in her head, and her knees buckled. She fainted, collapsing onto the stage in a heap of expensive wool and broken pride. My final word was their complete and total demolition. The aftermath was a whirlwind, but a distant one. I was at the calm center of the storm my family had created. The news story didn't just go viral, it became a local legend overnight. The narrative was irresistible. The scorned daughter, cast out as a failure, returns as a self-made CEO to save and own the very neighborhood her cruel family lorded over. I was framed as a local hero, an icon of resilience. My family, in turn, were cast as the villains, their public hypocrisy laid bare for all to see. The fallout for them was swift and brutal. Declan Hayes broke off the engagement with Brianna that very night. He sent back the ring, via courier, with a one-line note that, according to a frantic weeping call I later got from Aunt Carol, simply said, "I don't do business with people of your character." My parents became pariahs. Their friends, the same neighbors who had cheered for them in the park, now crossed the street to avoid them. They were mocked in the local grocery store. Their reign over Maple Creek Lane was over. They were now, officially, my tenants. I never spoke to them directly. All communication was handled through my company's property management division. They received formal, impersonal letters regarding community guideline upkeep, lawn maintenance schedules, and quarterly dues. I didn't evict them, that would have been too merciful, too quick. Instead, I let them live in their beautiful prison, stripped of the one thing they valued more than money, their social standing. Their power was gone, and they were left with nothing but the empty shell of their perfect house. About a month after the meeting, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was my mother. Her voice was unrecognizable, not the cold, commanding tone I knew, but a broken, sobbing whimper. She begged for forgiveness. She said she was proud of me. She said she always knew I had it in me. The lies were so pathetic, so transparent, that I felt nothing but a profound, empty pity. I deleted the message without a second thought. A week later, I was reviewing financial reports on my computer when an alert popped up on my screen. It was from the credit monitoring service I used for my business. It was a public record notification. Sharon Vance credit card account defaulted and closed. I stared at the notification. I hadn't done a thing. I hadn't frozen their credit cards or interfered with their finances in any way. I didn't have to. Their social ruin had done it for me. With Brianna's commission-based income tanking and my father's consulting work drying up as their reputation soured, their extravagant lifestyle had finally caught up with them. My victory wasn't a loud, fiery explosion. It was the quiet, crushing weight of their new reality, a reality they had built for themselves, brick by pathetic brick. I had inherited a legacy of strength from my grandmother. They had inherited the consequences of their own cruelty, and that was a debt they would be paying for the rest of their lives. And so, I finally built a home for myself, not of wood and nails, but of self-respect and unbreakable strength. My story is proof that the labels other people give you, failure, loser, nobody, only have power if you accept them. The most powerful revenge is building a life so magnificent that your detractors become irrelevant footnotes in your story. What labels have you refused to accept in your own life? I want to hear your stories of triumph. Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of a comeback, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about turning pain into power. Every click helps share these stories with someone who might need to hear them today. Thanks for watching.